Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we've got a story that's unfolding right now in Washington that could reshape the entire North American economy for years to come. Imagine this. It's a Wednesday afternoon in May 2026. Mark Wiseman, Canada's ambassador to the United States, walks into a conference room at Johns Hopkins University. The room is packed with American government officials, Canadian counterparts, trade lawyers, and policy experts. The event is hosted by the Canada-United States Law Institute, so everyone expects the usual diplomatic language, careful words, handshakes all around. But Wiseman doesn't play that game. He looks them straight in the eye and drops numbers and facts that hit like a freight train. He tells the Americans in that room that Donald Trump's 25% Section 232 tariffs on Canadian-made cars and auto parts aren't just hurting Canada. They're actually shutting down the single most important foreign market for American-made vehicles. Not China, not Europe, not Japan. Canada, the country right next door, sharing that massive 5,500-mile border. And the way he says it, with cold, hard data, leaves the room quiet. This isn't some vague warning. This is a former Wall Street heavyweight explaining exactly how America's own policy is cracking open its own $1.2 trillion auto industry from the inside. So, stick with me, because what happened in that room isn't just talk. It's already changing factories, jobs, and political calculations on both sides of the border. First, you need to understand who Mark Wiseman really is, because the messenger here matters as much as the message. This guy isn't a career diplomat who's spent decades mastering polite silence. He's not a politician looking for votes. Wiseman used to run the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, handling over $500 billion in assets. Then he went to BlackRock, the biggest asset manager on the planet, moving trillions around the globe. When Prime Minister Mark Carney needed someone to face the Trump administration in these high-stakes talks, he didn't send a suit from the Foreign Ministry. He sent a capital markets operator who thinks in terms of leverage, risk, and long-term capital flows. That choice alone tells you Ottawa isn't treating this like a normal diplomatic spat. They see it as a hard-nosed deal negotiation, and they brought the right player for it. So, what exactly did Wiseman lay out in Washington? His core point was simple, but devastating. Before these tariffs kicked in hard, Canada was the largest single buyer of American-made cars anywhere in the world, bigger than anyone else. And the auto trade between our two countries isn't like normal trade. It's not one country making finished cars and shipping them over. It's a deeply integrated supply chain where parts cross the border again and again during production. One engine might go back and forth 7 or 8 times before the car is finished. A single circuit board in a seat, an engine block, wiring harnesses, everything crisscrossing between Michigan, Ontario, Ohio, and back. Every crossing now carries that 25% tariff hit. It compounds. Costs stack up. And guess who ultimately pays? The American buyer at the dealership. Industry numbers show new vehicle prices jumping thousands of dollars because of this. For trucks and bigger vehicles, the ones Americans love like the F-150, Silverado, or Ram, we're talking increases that can top 10 grand per unit. The average new car was already around $48,000. Now that floor is rising fast. When prices climb that much, demand doesn't just dip. It falls off a cliff. Analysts are projecting 1.5 to 2 million fewer new vehicles sold in the U.S. every year, while these tariffs stay in place. In a normal year, the market moves about 15 to 16 million units. A drop like that is more than a slowdown. It's a crisis for an industry built on huge fixed costs and tight margins. Think about what that means in real life. General Motors has already scaled back production and laid off workers at key plants, including right in Detroit. Stellantis, the parent of Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram, pulled back investments in Windsor, Ontario, which directly feeds American assembly lines across the Midwest. Ford restarted an idled plant in Oakville not as some big expansion celebration, but as a defensive move just to keep Super Duty truck production flowing to American buyers. These aren't hypotheticals or future warnings. These are decisions already made on balance sheets today. The damage goes deeper with smaller suppliers. These are the tool and die shops, the parts makers running on razor-thin 3 to 5% margins. A 25% compounding tariff doesn't get absorbed. It ends businesses. One Windsor shop saw sales drop 70%. They're not waiting around hoping for a deal. They're pivoting to defense work, nuclear components, modular housing, anything that doesn't depend on this cross-border auto flow. Multiply that story across hundreds of suppliers in Ontario, Quebec, and the Great Lakes region, and you see an entire supply chain starting to unwind in real time. Even if tariffs eventually come down, the professor who studies this sector put it bluntly, the lingering threat alone has already chilled investment on both sides of the border. Once that trust and those relationships fracture, rebuilding isn't quick. While this is happening, Canada hasn't just sat still. Prime Minister Mark Carney went to Beijing earlier this year. They struck a deal that dropped Canada's tariff on Chinese-built electric vehicles from 100% down to just 6.1% for an initial quota of 49,000 vehicles, expanding later. In return, China eased tariffs on Canadian canola. But here's the part that really matters for the long game. Chinese auto companies getting this access have to set up joint ventures for actual production inside Canada within 3 years. Not just importing cars, but building them on Canadian soil with Canadian workers, using Canadian facilities. That changes everything strategically. A vehicle assembled in Ontario by a Chinese joint venture isn't easily labeled as a Chinese import anymore. It slips into the North American market under different rules. American efforts to block Chinese vehicles get much harder when the factory is right next door. You can see why this makes boardrooms in Detroit nervous, and why some U.S. senators are already sounding alarms about data security and manufacturing. Canada didn't just retaliate with mirror tariffs. They built an alternative path, bringing in new capital and technology, while the old integrated chain strains under American policy. All of this is happening against a ticking clock. July 1, 2026 marks a key review point for the USMCA trade deal that replaced NAFTA. Countries have to decide on renewal or start the exit process, which can drag on for years. That uncertainty alone freezes billions in investment. Right now, there's no clear negotiation schedule. U.S. Trade Representative demands cover dairy, alcohol sales, digital rules, and more. These aren't small tweaks. They're asking Canada to change core pieces of how their country works. Meanwhile, the auto tariffs meant to protect American manufacturing are doing visible damage in the very Midwest states that form the backbone of political support, places like Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky, Detroit, Cleveland, Indianapolis. Those communities are feeling higher truck prices, layoffs, and shrinking tax bases. Republican lawmakers from those areas are starting to feel the heat. Private messages urging relief are happening even if public breaks are still quiet. The political math is getting uncomfortable. And Wiseman didn't shy away from another point in Washington. Canada just hit the NATO 2% defense spending target years ahead of schedule and is on track toward 5%. That undercuts one of the main leverage lines used in these talks about burden sharing. Canada isn't coming empty-handed to the table. They bring critical minerals, aluminum for fighter jets, tungsten for military gear. This is a serious partner, not a junior one. The opposition leader Pierre Poilievre has even noted these strengths, showing a united Canadian position that surprises some observers. So where does this go from here? I see 3 main paths over the next 12 to 36 months. The first, and I'd put it at around 15% chance, is a quicker deal. Political pressure from auto-state Republicans builds enough that the administration moves toward a comprehensive USMCA renewal with big tariff relief on autos, joint supply chain commitments, and targeted exemptions. Canadian manufacturing gets some breathing room, but the Chinese joint venture doors stay open. It's the optimistic scenario, but reversing policy publicly isn't easy. The second path, and I think the most likely at about 60%, is muddling through without a big breakthrough. The USMCA review happens, but no full renewal. Annual reviews become the norm. Tariffs stay largely in place. Canadian production shifts more toward Europe, Asia, and those Chinese partnerships. Battery plants go up in Ontario. American manufacturers keep adjusting to higher prices and lower volumes at home. The relationship settles into a permanently more fractured state. Wiseman's point about the most important foreign market being closed by American action becomes accepted analysis. The third path, around 25%, is escalation. More tariffs on other sectors trigger broader pushback. Farm state senators speak out. More corporate legal challenges hit. Polling in key states shifts. By late 2027, Canada solidifies as the North American hub for Chinese auto expansion, while U.S. employment in the sector slips further. The realignment becomes hard to undo. Look, Mark Wiseman didn't walk into that room to plead or threaten. He delivered the math in the language of capital and operations. The American auto industry, that massive $1.2 trillion sector supporting over 10 million jobs, more than 3 times the entire military, is feeling self-inflicted wounds. The most important foreign buyer of U.S. cars has been structurally limited not by Canada, but by choices made in Washington. These decisions are playing out in factories, balance sheets, and political backrooms right now. The integrated chain that made North America an auto powerhouse for decades is under real stress. New partnerships are forming, capital is reallocating, and the human cost in communities on both sides of the border is mounting. What do you think happens next? Drop your take in the comments. Do you see a quick deal or a longer restructuring? Hit like if this breakdown helped cut through the headlines, subscribe for more straight analysis as these dominoes keep falling, and I'll see you in the next one when the next big move hits. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp out there.